Warm welcome to those who've just joined us. I'm Trisha Duffy. I'm the advisor to AdGreen, and we're going to kick off in about the next 30 seconds or so. I can see quite a few people are just coming in right now to join us this morning. So you're all very, very welcome. While you're waiting for us to kick off, please do feel free just to introduce yourselves in the chat. It'd be great if you could hit on the drop down panelists and attendees so you can just have a little conversation with each other during this next hour that we'll be together. Okay, it's 11 o'clock. I can still see quite a few people coming in, but I think let's get started. So very, very warm welcome to all of you who've joined us here for this webinar. I'm Trisha Duffy, as I've said, for those who were here a bit earlier. I am the strategic advisor to AdGreen. I will also introduce our panelists in a moment in more detail, but you'll see them talking shortly. Jo Coombes is the director who leads the project AdGreen, and Claire Donald, who is from Publicis Group. Thank you so much, both of you, for being here with us. It's fantastic to see so many people joining us, and thank you so much those of you getting into the idea of introducing yourself in the chat. Let us know whereabouts you are dialing in from, what company you're from, or anything you're particularly interested in. And as we go through this session, we find it's really, really helpful if we do keep it quite engaged. So as you're hearing from Jo when we start to get into the presentation, do feel free to put your comments in the chat, anything that occurs to you, and use the Q&A function for any questions that you would like to ask. I will be back at the end of our session to raise your questions to Jo and to Claire. But first of all, a little bit of housekeeping. So I am sure that all of you who have just joined us have already followed us on social media, but just in case you haven't, you can find us on LinkedIn and on Facebook and on Twitter, and our handle is @WeAreAdGreen. So please do follow us because it will enable you to keep up to date with all of our news. We're recording this webinar, so for those who can't make it today, it will be available on the AdGreen website and on our YouTube channel, probably from tomorrow, all things being well. Without further ado, I'm going to kick straight off and introduce Jo Coombes, who's going to take you through an overview of both AdGreen for those of you who are unfamiliar, and a little bit more detail on the levy. And at the end of this session, or at any point, you can download the full guide from the levy section of the AdGreen website. So over to you, Jo.
Thank you, Trisha. Great intro as always. Thanks for that. Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining. It's really great to see so many people joining this session. We've had a lot of interest, and we may even hold another one. So we'll keep you posted on that. And the best way to find out about all of those sorts of things is via the newsletter. There's a link at the bottom of every page of the website. So do sign up for that, and you'll get to hear about all of our upcoming events and updates with AdGreen. So without further ado, as Trisha said, I'm going to run you through a bit of an AdGreen overview and then go on to the levy in more specific detail. So just bear with me while I share my screen. Okay, can everybody see that? Perhaps Trisha, you can just give me a yes, just pop off mute.
Yeah, you're
great, brilliant. Okay, and just checking you can see the right screen, not my notes, just to give anything away.
Yeah, you're all good.
Perfect, that's great, thank you so much. Okay, and I'm just going to move these videos down to here. Perfect, okay. So just for those who don't know, AdGreen started actually quite a long time ago. I started it as a side project when I was working in production myself, but as of last year, we sort of came under the wing of the Advertising Association, and we have two aims: to support the industry in measuring carbon emissions, that's the first aim, and then in reducing them. So everything we do is really focused towards those two aims. Since we became sort of part of the AA, the Ad Association, we've also initiated a strategic partnership with BAFTA's Albert, and they are essentially AdGreen but for film and TV, but they've been around a lot longer in their sort of formal capacity than us. And they've got a wealth of knowledge and also data from the tool that they've had in place for a number of years. So really that means we can learn from them, they can learn from us, and we can both kind of move forward as quickly as possible. And all of the things that they've done in the past really help us accelerate and move forward quickly, because we're a little bit behind where film and TV are at in terms of education and data. We've also got the key trade bodies on our board. So that's the AOP representing photographers, the APA for the production side of things, the IPA for agencies, and ISBA for advertisers or our clients. And we're also supported by 9 key industry organisations, so a mix of agency holding companies and brands, and also a production consultancy as well. So just recognising that their input is really helping us to drive things forward, and we have a number of working groups which they're all fantastic participants of. So thank you to all of them, because that's really allowed us to get going. And really the reason we're here today is to talk about the funding of the project on an ongoing basis. But to get started, those industry organisations have loaned us funds, which has enabled us to get started with our calculator tool, with the training that we've been offering since November, and with the resources on the site as well that have been upgraded. So lots of great things we've been able to do with their support. But now we need to obviously support the project in the longer term on an ongoing basis. So that's what the levy is all about. I'll be talking to you about that in more detail in a moment. So just to run you through the different elements of the project, really we focus on a kind of trifecta: tools, resources and training. So I'm just going to take you through each of the pieces now. First up, as I mentioned, the training began in November, and that is online 2-hour sessions for production and creative teams. We keep them very small, so about 15 people per session. We run them 4 times a week, and we have 3 amazing trainers who just keep everyone engaged. It's very interactive, and you will learn about sort of the climate crisis as an overview, what that means for our industry, what people have been doing about it, and what you can go away and do next. And there's a couple of interactive games in there. It's a good 2 hours, and the feedback we've been getting is great. And you know, we've tweaked the deck a few times just based on feedback we've had, and that's been really invaluable as well. So please do sign up for those. They are completely free, and you can sign up via the website. There's a training section of the site. The next 2 elements are things that we've kind of inherited, if you like, from Albert. So creative energy is the first. And essentially from the data that they collected in the tool, they realized that a massive chunk of emissions were coming from how spaces were powered. So how studios, offices, casting studios, locations, how they were powered was generating a large amount of carbon because they were powered by fossil fuels. So to combat some of that, the idea was that if the group buying scheme could be set up, that it would enable as many companies as possible to sort of shift with access to the best renewable energy around, and that's been provided by Good Energy for the last few years. So you can access that scheme again through the website. It's a very simple form to fill out with a few details, and someone from the creative energy team will get back to you about how to join that scheme. The next one is creative offsets. So this is an offsetting scheme. And again, BAFTA have done sort of the hard work in finding the best partner, and the partner is Natural Capital Partners. And you can offset through, again, through the website. It will take you to the offsetting hub. Of course, you need to really understand how much you need to offset. So until the tool is available, which I'll come on to in a second, that one is not going to be so useful for you, but it gives you an overview of how the partner was picked and the sort of things that offsetting will go towards, and also the cost, which is £9 per tonne. Next is the resources section of the website, and that includes a downloadable resources guide, which covers off all departments, so right through from creative to production to post, as well as all of the departments you might have on a shoot for motion or stills. So that's well worth downloading. It's essentially a kind of digest of the whole resources section of the website with lots of links and bits and pieces to follow. And also on that resources section, we've got something else we've handily inherited from BAFTA, the supplier list, which a lot of people have been asking for. So that's linked through from our website as well. There's no point reinventing the wheel and creating a second one when we're all using the same types of suppliers. And also there's kind of template text for your call sheet, questions to ask your studio, lots of things on there that are well worth having a bit of time to explore. This red triangle just indicates where we're at the moment in this kind of timeline, and we are just developing the carbon calculator at the moment. It will be launched in September and enable collaborative footprinting across all stakeholders who are working in production. So essentially it will allow agencies, production companies, service companies, post companies, anyone who is working on the production of a piece of advertising to input data about that project. And then once sort of tagged, if you like, to the project, the brand, the advertising agency holding company, the production consultancy will all be able to see that data and get reports once the footprint has been audited. So that's a big piece of our offering, and that will be available in September. And the final piece for now, there may be more in the future, of course, once we get the data and see what it's all about. But the final piece for now that we're looking at is certification, which will be part of the tool once it's launched, once we've got the sort of criteria set. And again, we'll be basing it on the work that Albert has done. But obviously we have a different audience and a different way of working, and our projects are much shorter. So we need to reflect that in the criteria that we create. That will be what you need to kind of hit in order to get certified. And that, just like the offsetting, will sort of be done through the tool. That will be the sort of one-stop shop for your measurement, for your offsetting if needed. And obviously you want to reduce as much as you can first, and then for your certification down the line as well once that's introduced. And that will likely be in 2022, that certification. So throughout our comms, events, resources and tools and training, we always talk about emissions from 4 specific activity types. So that's transport, spaces, materials and disposal. So these are the 4 key areas that we always talk about. Anything else is kind of out of scope for us. So if you're talking about things like long-term storage of items, sort of cloud computing, that sort of thing, that's a little bit out of scope for us. But these are the sorts of things that you'll be able to record in the tool. So all your information about transport across the board, all the different spaces that you might use in a shoot or production, materials, and then also how you get rid of them. So those are the 4 things we always talk about. And it's worth also sort of being aware that this is a team effort. Individual people out or production teams will not be able to completely eliminate a production's footprint, or not yet anyway. And from Albert's data, we understand that the average production manager will only be able to reduce a footprint by around 15 to 20%. And it also depends where you're starting from. It might be a very small shoot where there's a couple of things you can do and you're almost down to 0 already because it's a very small production. Or it might be a massive production. So there's a huge range in between. And there will be things within a production manager's direct control, and things they'll be able to influence, like asking a studio about their energy tariff, and things that they'll need to offset. And that really goes for anyone working on this project. Or any particular project. You're always going to have things you can do yourself, things that you can influence, and then things that are going to be unavoidable that you will need to offset in order to make your shoot carbon neutral. And that can be done obviously with creative offsets or with another offsetting partner if you have one. So just a couple of definitions before we go into the levy section. Instead of really talking about advertising agencies, production companies, and service companies, we recognise that lots of different companies work in different ways, and you might be acting as a sort of ad agency one minute, you might be a service company the next. Obviously, that's not the case for everyone, but just to make sure everything feels a bit more inclusive, we've adopted a couple of terms. So first of all is principal production partner. So this is one we're going to use quite a bit in the levy slides that are coming up. So this really means a company who are the principal or primary supplier of production services directly to the advertiser, and they would be the ones billing them for that service. So in most cases, it's going to be an ad agency, but it could also be an in-house agency, or it could even be a production company, a service production company, an audio post company, a visual post company, lots of different options there who are going to work directly with the advertiser. So sometimes this might be you, sometimes it might not be, but it's just worth bearing in mind that's what we mean when we talk about principal production partner. And then we also talk about third-party production partners. So these are ones who work with the principals to create the work. So in a sort of traditional TVC sort of setting, for example, you would have an ad agency and then a production company. That production company would be the third-party production partner in this sort of instance. So just to get those out of the way first. So I'll take a little sip of water before I go into the next bit. And now I'm just going to bring you on to the levy itself. So beginning on the 1st of June, the AdGreen Levy is a recommended 0.25% of the production cost to the advertiser, as per the inclusions that I'm going to cover shortly, up to a total levy amount of £2,500 per production, and that's the equivalent of £1 million of leviable production cost. It is optional and will be communicated as such to advertisers by any UK-based principal production partners who intend to collect it on our behalf before passing it to us on a quarterly basis. For tax purposes, the levy qualifies as a normal advertising expense, just like any other production cost, but it is not liable to VAT, which is quite important. So at the point where it's invoiced, it would not have any VAT applied. We've created a full levy guide, as Tricia mentioned just at the beginning there, which covers many of the items that we're going to run through today in a lot further detail, and includes the kind of key parties involved in the scheme. So as I said, a principal production partner, or PPP as it's sometimes called throughout this deck, is the principal supplier of production services to the advertiser, who will be billing the advertiser for those services. In most cases, as I said, it will be an ad agency. So just going to move on to the inclusions and exclusions. We've tried to keep this very, very simple so that we can explain it very easily, which hopefully you'll agree I'm about to, and so that it can also be applied very easily. So in very broad terms, things that are included are costs to produce the asset. And those would be the ones that are included in the principal production partner's cost estimate. Things that are excluded are all costs to use, store, or transmit the asset, plus the principal production partner's insurance, and also media spend, which is covered by another levy called the ASBOF levy, which you may be familiar with, but our levy does not cover media spend, just for the avoidance of doubt. So there are lots more sort of details on the nitty-gritty in the levy guide, and sort of the questions that I've had so far, thankfully already in the levy guide, which is fantastic. But if there is something that you think, oh, what about this? Don't hesitate to ask. We can update that guide at any time, and it is kind of a working document whilst we get up and running. So do feel free to ask a question if it's not in that guide. How is it collected? So once an ad agency or a principal production partner has decided to participate as a levy collector, this is what would happen. Obviously, there needs to be a conversation with the advertiser in advance of this, but assuming that's happened and the advertiser is happy with the application of the levy to their production cost estimate, then the PPP would add 0.25 to the relevant costs as per those inclusions we just talked about, so all costs to produce. That would be sent to the advertiser, who would then approve that estimate. Obviously, there may be some back and forth on other costs in the meantime. But eventually it would be approved, and at that point the principal production partner would invoice the full total of the levy, obviously excluding VAT, along with the production costs. Now, we recognise that different companies have different payment sort of structures. It might be that you invoice 50% upfront, 100% upfront, 25%, whatever that is. For us, we recommend that the whole amount of the levy is invoiced at the front. So that just means that for you don't have to kind of faff around with separating off 2 different payments or 3 different payments, no matter how, depending on how many sort of chunks you break your production budget into. And it also means if the cost changes, and things tend to go up more than down, I think, it just means that levy amount stays the same. It's fixed on that first estimate once it's been signed off. So the whole amount is invoiced at the beginning. And then once the advertiser has paid that invoice, the principal production partner will hold the levy amount of that and then hold that for us until we come to collect it every 3 months. And I know Claire's got some sort of information on how Publicis Group are handling that as well. So that would be quite a good insight for you once Claire gets into her little Q&A. So key dates for you. As I mentioned right at the start of this section, the levy begins on the 1st of June. And what do I mean by begin? So we are recommending that the levy is added to production cost estimates from the 1st of June. That's obviously for any advertising agency or principal production partner who has agreed to be a collector, and for any advertiser who has agreed to be a payer. So from the 1st of June, it would be included on cost estimates. And then for any payments collected from the advertiser from the 1st of July through to the end of September, so 30th September, those would be the ones that we would collect first. And we would only be collecting payments that you have already received. So you would never be out of pocket paying us the levy. You wouldn't be sending us money that you're intending to collect or that's outstanding from your advertiser client. It would always be money you've already collected. Anything uncollected would go into the next quarter. So once we reach the end of the first quarter, we would then send a reminder or a sort of form that you'd fill out to sort of detail how much you've collected and how much from each client. That would be completed by the end of October and sent back to us. And then we would send invoices immediately following that, which would be paid within 30 days. So you can see there that although we're starting at the 1st of June, AdGreen doesn't receive any funds from this until about November, by which time, of course, as I mentioned, the calculator will be out as well. So there'll be lots of tools, resources and training to crack on with as well. So just to let you know how that first cycle works. And once that first one's through, then we just repeat the process every 3 months. So registering as a levy collector. Obviously, we need to know who to contact every 3 months. So for any principal production partner, whether you're an ad agency, production company, I know there's a couple of other music companies, post companies on the call this morning. If you're working with an advertiser directly and you'd like to be part of this, we need to know that you want to participate. So to that end, we'd need you to register on the form that's hosted on the website. It's a very short form which gathers a bit of company information, your name and address, your company number, for example, plus a finance contact and a production contact. And it's those 2 contacts that we would send the reminder to each quarter to fill out that form. And submitting the form just constitutes consent to be contacted by us. It doesn't really commit you to collecting any payments. There may be quarters where you don't collect anything, depending on the work that you're doing or the sort of scheduling of your invoicing. It just means that we will contact you each quarter to see what you've collected, and then we'll organise that payment from you. Do advertisers need to register? So it's not required in the same way, because we don't need to contact them in order to find out what's been contributed. However, to give our team oversight as to the level of engagement in the industry amongst advertisers, we do request that advertisers register if they are looking to support the scheme via a form that's hosted on the Levy section of the AdGreen website. And that Levy payer form requests details of the advertisers' principal production partners, including any in-house agencies. That isn't mandatory, it's not a mandatory field, so if you prefer to email them over, or for whatever reason you aren't able to provide them at that point, that's not a problem, it's just for oversight for us. But if we do get those on that form as well, we can then cross-reference them with those who've already registered as collectors and see if they need any support in registering if they've not done so yet. And the form will also ask for permission to include the advertiser's name and a logo in any communications regarding the levy. And you can, of course, refuse that as well. That's no problem. And you might have noticed on the bottom of the levy page of the website, we have logos of our supporters so far. So once we have a logo from any supporters, be they collectors or payers, we do add those on there just to show the sort of breadth of support that we have across the industry. And that's growing on a daily basis. So for the avoidance of doubt, any organisation that's classed as an in-house agency would be required to register as a principal production partner, i.e. a collector, rather than an advertiser, because they are essentially your agency and working with you to produce those advertising assets. And when registering, you're reminded that that doesn't kind of constitute agreement to pay the levy to your principal production partner. So obviously you need to have that conversation with them directly as well, just so that all the dots are joined up. So we recognise that an advertiser might notify their principal production partner of their intent to pay the levy in a number of different ways. So just to highlight some of the ways this might happen, and there's more on this in the levy guide, but it could be a verbal or informal kind of email agreement, which might apply to all projects that you do together, or it might apply on a project by project basis. It might be by signing an addendum to an existing production agreement. And we have, over the past few months, created a template contract addendum that you can download from the Levy section of the website, which is worded so as to apply to kind of all projects that the agreement references. So that's another way to do it. Alternatively, a principal production partner may choose to add the levy to all production cost estimates by default and then communicate that intention to clients in advance, noting that obviously they have the right to remove it from the estimate prior to signing it off. Or they might do the reverse, contacting everyone to ask if they're happy for it to be added going forward before kind of then making sure it's added. We've left it very open in our comms and in our levy guides so that each principal production partner and advertiser can find the best approach that fits the way that they work. So there's no hard and fast rule of how it must be agreed between you. It's really on a case-by-case basis up to you. And there's more information about that in the levy guide, as I mentioned. So what to do next? So you can find out more on the website. As I said, the levy guide is really the sort of levy Bible, if you like, and we are still open to adding things to it. So if you think something's missing or not clear, do let us know and we can obviously update that. That's on the levy section of the site. As well as that contract addendum I mentioned and the registration forms. And you'll notice when you go to that page, there's a link to just go straight to the registration forms, which will just take you straight to the bottom of the page where those links are. We also have the levy@weareadgreen.org email if you have any further questions. Spoiler alert, that does just come straight to me, so I will get back to you as soon as I can. But if you would like any sort of support in communicating things internally, do let me know. I have a number of documents that I can send you to help you, and I'm going to follow up with everyone who's here today with those anyway afterwards, so you'll get those from me hopefully sometime next week. And there may be, as I mentioned, another webinar in a couple of weeks, but anything that we do put on will be publicised via our newsletter, so do sign up for that to get information directly to your inbox. And in terms of kind of next steps, just to leave you with for the moment, I think the best one to do is just to read that levy guide. It's got all the full information. It's written in pretty plain English. It should hopefully be very straightforward to understand and digest. And then, of course, you need to decide if you intend to participate in the scheme and register as a levy collector or payer as appropriate. And registering via the forms on the website would be the next step. And then, of course, speaking to the various parties that are involved. And that would also include your production consultancies as well, to make sure everyone's aware of your participation. And I know there are a number of production consultants on the call today as well. So we've been obviously talking to lots of different people in the course of this comms effort in the last few weeks, including the ISBA membership, the IPA membership. We did a webinar with the AOP yesterday. I know the APA have sent directed members to this particular webinar. We're trying to cover all bases, but if you think there's a group of people we've missed, please don't hesitate to let us know. And there ends the presentation. So I'm going to hand back to Trisha. I know she has sort of a number of Q&A bits ready for us. So I'm going to stop sharing now.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for that. As a real whistle-stop tour. And Claire, I'd love to invite you to come back to us with your video and audio if you would like. Just a clarification question, Joe, that's just come from the audience. The 1st of June levy start date, is that for productions where the first estimate is presented to the client from the 1st of June onwards? That's from Cheryl. Thank you, Cheryl, for your question.
That's a great question, and I would say yes. And the reason that it starts on the 1st, but the first quarter starts in July, is because we didn't really anticipate anyone being able to move fast enough that they would have had it on a production estimate, had that estimate approved, invoiced out, and had that paid within that 30 days. So obviously, if you are that speedy, that's fine too, and you can pop that into the first quarter. But we really did think that most people would not be able to wouldn't be collecting any money in that first month. So that's why we sort of recommended that it starts a little bit ahead of when those first payments would come in.
And there's some companies as well in the sector that are both in-house agency as well as producer. They're asking, Grace, thank you for your question, whether or not they should register twice as a collector and as a payer, or whether they can register just once.
So registering as a payer isn't essential, but as I said, just useful for us for oversight. So that's kind of up to them as a judgment call. But it would be the collector that we would need to know about. So anyone who is collecting money from the advertiser, even if it's technically just another department of the same company, if you're collecting that money and collecting the levy, then we need to know about you so that we can get in touch.
Okay, brilliant. I'll come back to some of the questions from the audience. Thank you very much for those of you who keep putting them in. But I just actually wanted to kind of unpack this a little bit and maybe ask Claire, if I can, why Publicis Group in the UK has decided to participate.
Well, I personally, I think this is the burning issue of our time. There are so many important things that we need to change, but without being all doomy, if we don't have a planet that's viable, then frankly, the others sort of fall in priority. So I think it's incredibly important, and it's a view that is shared across Publicis Group with 27 agencies, but this is focused predominantly on the above the line agencies, Saatchi's, Lea Burnett and Pub Poke. And it's reflected by our clients. They're all demanding the same thing, that we need to look at sustainability across the board. So it was a bit of a no-brainer, to be honest with you. I've been involved with Joe trying to push AdGreen forward for many, many years. I've only been at Pub Group for just over a year. And when I came, I was delighted to find pockets across the group of people who felt quite passionately about this. We've pulled it together. We've now got a group Green Council, and we're founder members of AdGreen, and delighted to take our clients on that journey.
I mean, we've just enjoyed your support so much at AdGreen, as you know, and thank you again for joining us here today. Do you have sort of any thoughts yet? I know it's really early stages, about how you would intend to communicate your participation in the scheme with your clients.
Well, I flagged this to the CEOs a few months ago, and we were all a bit gung-ho and thought we'd just have an opt-out scheme. So we thought we'll put the levy on and we'll obviously communicate to the clients so they know what it is, but they would be asked to take it off as opposed to the buy-in. Then the sensible finance team got involved, and because of every client has a different contractual arrangement, it has been decided that we are going to go to every client and get an opt-in. So we're very much in the process of doing that. We've got a number of clients signed up already, and we hope to have as many people as possible ready by the beginning of June.
So Joe, Dawn has asked a question which I think you can answer, which actually ties this whole thing together, about whether or not we have standard letter or language that organisations like the agencies can use to communicate their clients. Can you just speak to that for a moment?
Of course, yeah. So actually I have been providing some sort of template text, and I think what I will do as a result is I will pop it on the website somewhere, so that that's easy to get hold of. But I'll also, when I do my follow-up with everyone, which will just be very informal, and I hope no one minds the sort of mass email, and I'll obviously blind copy everyone, but I will include that in there as well. So it's a bit of template text that just explains a little bit about what AdGreen is, what the levy is in a very small nutshell, and why it's kind of an important thing to the principal production partner, which of course you can tweak, but it just gives you a bit of an outline. So I will share that and make sure it's available on the website as well.
That's fantastic. So you've kind of made a statement to participate in that. You've been, a massive supporter of AdGreen for many years, Claire, and you're starting to kind of work through this kind of comms angle and what it's going to take. But are there actual sort of operational changes that you're needing to make within Publicis Group agencies in order to actually facilitate this transition?
There are, but they're pretty straightforward. So I would hate anyone to feel daunted by that. By the way, all of the resources from AdGreen and Joe are fantastic, and I've lent very heavily on all of those to help communicate what we're trying to do. But essentially, we are going to add an addendum to everyone's contract once they've agreed to come on board, and we'll simply have a dedicated cost code. So we will be putting the percentage on the bottom of the estimates. We'll be able to track that. We'll do a report at the end of every quarter, I believe, but we could do it whenever we wanted, obviously. So we'll be tracking that per client, per project, and we'll tally that up at the end of every quarter, and then we'll pay AdGreen the following quarter is how I intend we're going to do it. But it's a pretty easy thing just by applying a code as part of the estimates.
Joe, is there anything that you'd like to add to the process part of this?
Sure. So just kind of, I know I've kind of had a number of conversations, obviously, with different agencies, and we are also in the process of creating a sort of template budget, or a budget template, if you will, which will just kind of guide people on how to actually apply that into the budget sort of structure that they might have. So obviously it's not a one size fits all, everyone has a different template they use, but it will just highlight the sort of two main ways to sort of apply that levy. So one is to kind of have it applied to sort of subtotals that are cost to produce. One is also to have it applied to every line that is a cost to produce, and it will just depend how you've got your budget structured. And kind of a simple yes, no, whether it applies or not, so that you can have it on your template as standard, but sort of take it off or add it on as needed. And then it will just total up at the end. So we'll provide that, and that's going to come out probably next week, I think. So again, I'll make sure to hold off in following up with everyone until that's ready, and I can include that as well.
Amazing. David, thank you very much for your question. So he's asking about, you touched on this, about the levy being paid up front. What happens if, in the unlikely event, I imagine the principal costs are lower than the estimate? Is it reconcilable in any way?
So the way we've designed it is that, to try and keep it as simple, everything in the guide, just to say as well, is a recommendation. So if you feel that you have a better system that would need to work for you guys, then obviously you're more than welcome to do that. We really advise invoicing the whole amount up front to give the client visibility early about what it is and how much it is, but also to minimize you having to do that sort of separation twice or any number of times. So if you wanted to do a 50-50, that's more than up to you. If you wanted to do a kind of reconciliation at the end, that's obviously also up to you, but just bear in mind you may have already paid it to us before you then need to reconcile it back. So again, there's a bit of guidance on the website in the guide on that, sort of when we talked about cancellations and postponements and things. So hopefully we've covered all bases. But again, it is just a guide. So if you feel it needs to work slightly differently for how you need to work internally, then feel free to tweak that. We don't, in the nicest possible way. We obviously don't have any way of checking whether you've collected all of the exact amounts and it's all completely tied up and neat and tidy. So we'll be taking your word for it. So if there's an element where you've given us the first 50 and you know that the next, remainder is coming in the next quarter, then, that's just what you need to do. So that's not a problem as far as we're concerned.
And just to put that into context, I mean, how much are we talking? Can you just give us a little bit of a, it's really bizarre, isn't it, when you sort of think in percentages? There is a fantastic calculator on the website, and while you've been talking, I've been pasting links to all of the different elements of the website like a crazy person. But can you just give a little, a little sort of sense of how much money we're talking here on, various different sizes of budget?
Yes, so, and I'm actually just going to pull up my levy guide for this because I do not want to tell anyone the wrong thing. But then I'm just going to say, in the meantime, there is a calculator sort of widget on the levy page of the website where you can just put in a budget amount and it will tell you how much that is that you'd need to pay. And obviously it's capped at that £2,500 as well. But it's just loading now. Okay, so I think it's 1 second. I know I should know this off the top of my head. This is like Dragon's Den.
So when they ask them to do mental arithmetic, and say,
yeah, no, you can just see them failing. You can see them die behind their eyes. Yeah, this is exactly me. No, only because there is a very specific number that we kind of talk about in the guide, and I just wanted to reference that quite specifically. So here we go. So it's £2.50 per £1,000 of relevant cost, or £100 per 40,000 of relevant cost. And just to give you some context, so in 2019, the amount which would be subject to the levy for an average production was £322.43. So the average production in 2019, from the data that we gathered from the IPA's PPG group, was £128,971.44. So on that, it would be £322.43.
£300. So, I mean, Claire, from your perspective, that doesn't sound material, but I know that that's really easy for us to say sitting having a nice time doing a webinar. But does it feel particularly material to you from where you sit as an agency?
I mean, ultimately, it's the advertisers who are paying this, and they would have to feel it isn't material. I think most people would agree it's a relatively small amount to pay for such a fantastic service. So that seems to be the response we're getting from all of the clients we're talking to at the moment. I think it's great that it's capped. And, we will be using the code that we use. We will make sure that we're not charging clients if things significantly change, or if anything is cancelled, they'll get that refunded to them. So I think it's not a daunting figure. People are very happy to put that kind of level forward.
Can you clarify, Jo and Claire, probably, whether or not the levy is applicable to AV productions only, or would it also apply to stills and radio?
So it would be motion, stills and audio would be our recommendation.
Okay, and what about overseas? So what happens with overseas payments? Do they equally apply?
So this is a great question. It's definitely worth clarifying. So we are only working with UK-based principal production partners. So if you're joining this call from overseas, thanks for your support, and we'll be in touch, but not right now. So principal production partners who are based in the UK, and the levy is applied to, or we recommend it's applied to relevant costs. So as per that inclusion, the cost to produce, regardless of where the content will air. So even if it's airing outside of the UK, and regardless of where those production activities take place. So if you're shooting abroad, as long as they're in that production cost estimate and they're part of the principal production partner's estimate, and they're a cost to produce, then they would be applicable to the levy.
Okay. Great. Right, there's a question here that I'm just trying to make sure I get this right. So thank you everyone asking your question. I'm making sure that I understand exactly what you're asking. There's a question that's coming from some clients about whether or not the agencies and production companies should be funding this levy. Thank you, Cheryl. I hope I've interpreted your question correctly. But she's had that question from her clients, is about whether or not it's the agency and the production company that are contributing. Can you just give us a little bit of clarity about that?
Sure.
Do you want me to,
yeah, go for it.
It's the advertisers who are asking us to do the work. We wouldn't be doing the work if it wasn't for the advertisers. So I think it's right that the advertisers should pay. But I do think that agencies contribute a huge amount of time, which obviously costs money. It's the producers who are collating, working through the carbon calculator, collating that. It's the finance departments who are working to make sure that the right amount of money is being paid. So I think that would be our contribution, would be that we are helping to facilitate and coordinate the effort. But it is, at the moment, it is the client that is paying for that service, and that feels right to me.
Okay,
and
great.
That was exactly what I would say too. So
well done, so aligned. Sid mentions that some production codes, I'm not sure exactly where he's talking about, would ask for an inclusion of a green steward on the shoot. If you have a green steward, should you still be paying the levy?
So that is totally your call, and we totally recognise that there are forward-thinking clients, and there have been for a number of years, who are engaging with other companies who offer different services in the same sort of area. I think for us, obviously, we provide everything free at the point of use. That's why we've introduced the levy, and it's good to also mention here that we aren't a consultancy. We don't come and consult on an individual production, and we don't provide a sort of green runner. So whenever we get asked that question, I tend to point people towards the companies that are working in that sort of way. We are about providing everything free at the point of use for the industry at large. And really the reason we do that is to create, or to hopefully generate, a nice big data set that we can look at and review and decide where we can better support the industry in reduction. We have two aims, measurement and reduction. So it's always about those two things. So for us, if you are working with a company like that, that's a judgment call for you, whether you want to also contribute to the levy and how you kind of work those two things, whether they're sort of in tandem or whether you feel one is more appropriate than the other. And that's totally your call. I would not want to say what you should do in that case, but that is, we recognise that people are doing that, and that's totally your call. And whether you apply the levy to that particular cost item is also your call. It feels a little bit strange that it would be, because it's kind of a strange thing that we'd be then making some money from. Obviously it'd be a very small amount, 0.25%, but just on principle I think it wouldn't be quite right. But obviously all are recommendations in the guide, so that's your call.
I think because some of the agencies in group do work with independent consultants. Hopefully if they're doing their job right, you will have less of a bill to pay when you pay the levy as well. So I think that in a sense, by paying that separate cost, hopefully you're reducing your levy payment.
Yeah, and the other thing I think to say, and I know Tricia will speak to this from her experience from the sort of Albert side as well, is that those who are sort of engaged in this do tend to have lower budgets, because broadly carbon follows cost as well. So, for example, flying is one of the biggest parts. If you're not flying, that's going to take away some cost. Obviously, it depends where you were going and what the sort of crew costs were, for example, and obviously it's balancing in different areas. But generally speaking, there is a sort of reduction in cost. And obviously, the smaller your budget is, the smaller the levy is. And another thing that we kind of touched upon at the beginning, but if you're also including, once the tool is up and running, if you're looking at kind of offsetting as well, your offsetting costs will also be smaller once you start to obviously reduce your footprint. So there's big incentives to reduce, carbon, because that will follow with the budget, which will then follow with the levy, and also with your carbon, because that will go towards your, reduce your offsetting cost as well. And I think the other thing just to mention that we haven't really touched upon is that we've set this levy percentage at a rate that we hope will generate the right amount of income for us. We're not looking to generate huge pots of profit. That's not how we work. It's enough to cover our running costs and make sure we can continue offering everything to everyone. But obviously the more advertisers who opt in, the lower we can potentially make that percentage. So we've set it at a rate that we think reflects the amount of take up that we'll get at the beginning, and hopefully increasing as we move through time. But if we get enough supporters, we will look to reduce it. So it's kind of like the group buying scheme that we were talking about earlier with creative energy. It's the same sort of principle. So do jump on board.
So can we just link together now the calculator and this measurement along with the levy? So Bria, thank you very much for your question. You were one of the first to ask, but I've saved your question because I think this loops all of this together. So She says, as an advertiser fully on board with Greener Productions, she's wondering whether if it's fully advertiser funded, how can she make sure that the PPP actually uses the training, the resources, the calculate, all of the things that AdGreen has as resources? And then is there a way to measure the impact of the levy at the end of the shoot? But I guess actually probably doesn't mean the levy, but the impact of the things that were done. And how can we make that transparent in order to actually make the productions greener? Can you just sort of talk about the relationship between the funding is one part of it, isn't it, but the resources and how they tie up together?
Sure. So, go Claire. you have real world experience of this because this is what you've been trying to do.
Well, we will soon, hopefully. But correction, by the way, when I said your levy will be less, I meant your offset cost will be less. But I think really, I would say if you're an advertiser, I would demand that transparency from your agency. They should be able to provide you with the information about how many people have participated in the training. And we're pushing for 100% of all of our production teams. We're also trying to get the creatives and the account people involved as well. I think having that knowledge and that understanding should be something that's the responsibility of everyone within the agency. But I think just demand transparency. If you don't feel that you are getting the things that, again, are very, very clearly communicated through all of the AdGreen resources about the sort of things that we should be doing, if you don't think your agencies and your production partners are doing that, I would push back and demand that they do.
So thank you very much. That's perfect. And Jo, just to be really explicit and really put you on the spot in a sort of Newsnight question time style way, what are you going to do with this money? Thank you, Samantha, for asking that question. It's not a stupid question, it's an excellent question. What are you going to be doing with the money you collect from the levy, please?
Sure. So in a kind of broad term, it covers our operational costs. Obviously, that covers a lot of different things. It covers me, my team, which at the moment is 0.5 of a person, but she's wonderful. She's managing the calculator. That's Sophie, you may have come across. But it also will cover staff to support those who are going to be using the calculator and down the line with certification. We also need a little bit of support on just administrating the levy in terms of finance on our side. So there's kind of a resource cost for us, for sure. We need to cover the costs of the trainers who do the sessions, and they run 4 or 5 times a week. So we need to cover their costs as well. We have a website to keep running. We obviously have the calculator that we've been developing. And we also need to pay back our initial loans as well. So once the levy is generating enough funds, we will look to pay those loans back and be sort of fully self-sufficient on the levy. We're also putting together events. We have comms that we're working on. So there's lots of different things that I'm sort of getting exhausted just thinking about all the things we're doing now. But there's lots and lots of elements to the project to try and, get the messages out there that these things exist, to provide them in the first place, to support you in using them, and to, support you ultimately in measuring and reducing your footprint. So lots of different things, but in a nutshell, operational costs for AdGreen.
Brilliant, thank you. Louise wants to know if her agency is not a PPP, but she would like to participate in the scheme, can she still participate?
I would hope I've explained it well enough, because I would wonder how you would be an agency but not a PPP. I guess you mean if you've chosen not to collect the levy, or if maybe all of your advertisers that you're working with, for whatever reason, don't want to pay. Yeah, exactly. So you have the potential to be one, but you aren't maybe yet. That's not a problem, and I would still urge you to use the resources on the website to attend the training. And these resources are available for everyone. Obviously, we can't control or stipulate that this levy is paid, and there will be people in your position where you want to sort of demonstrate your commitment, but you don't have that kind of support to do it on that side of things. So absolutely do still join the training, use the resources, and when the calculator is available, use the calculator as well.
And Claire, Julie just was asking the reverse comms question. So I think we talked and covered quite adequately how we're talking to our clients and having that conversation. But what about the production companies? Have you got in place a process for letting the production companies know that you are intending to participate and that they should be adding this percentage to their budgets?
Honestly, I think it's a slightly different arrangement per agency. So truth be told, I'd have to refer back to the heads of production in each of the individual agencies, but I think production companies are pushing this as much as everything, so I think it's a very symbiotic conversation going on there. We're all trying to support each other to get to a good place, but I will look into that and come back to you.
I would also, just for a point of clarification as well, if you are a production company working with a PPP, you are essentially then a third party. So you wouldn't be adding that levy to your own budget, because the agency would be doing it essentially for you when they put their budget into yours, if you see what I mean. So if you are working directly with the client, then you would put it onto your budget. But if you're working via an agency as a kind of third party production supplier, you wouldn't need to worry about adding the levy on at all.
All right, so that takes that.
Yeah, because otherwise you'd be kind of double levying, if you see what I mean. So it's just applied once and just by the principal production partner. But thanks for asking that, because other people may have been wondering the same thing.
Yeah, that's a really helpful clarification. So there's just two more questions, and I guess then we'll wrap up. One is really both quite detailed questions, things that we've covered, but just to go back and make sure that we're clear. Stacey, thank you very much. So if we're not fast enough to get signed up to the levy before the 1st of June, can we sign up after this? And are there any fees involved in registering as a payer or collector? And if we sign up, is it still voluntary for clients, even if you have made a commitment to sign up? So you could have some clients within your portfolio who are participating and some that are not. Okay, so I'll try and do them in order. Yes, you can sign up at any time. Obviously, the sooner, the better, just for us in terms of oversight. The next one was, what was the next bit? Any fees? There are no fees involved beyond the actual levy itself and whatever internal sort of time it might take you to sort of get ready for it. And the last one was, can you be a collector but not actually collect anything? Yes, of course, you can be registered, but for whatever reason, not be collecting anything yet, or maybe ever. Hopefully not ever, but yes, you could in theory be a collector. As I said, it's just so that we know to contact you to ask you if you've collected anything. It doesn't hold you to actually collecting.
I'm sure that picture will be true of us and many agencies, that we have some clients already sold up, the conversations are in different places. Some may not choose to do it till Q4, who knows, but we will absolutely be collecting and paying on all of those that are and then trying to encourage everyone that hasn't yet to come on board. Amazing.
I know you covered this at the beginning, Jo, and I also know that you're going to be sending some collateral to everyone who's signed up for their webinar today. So Cheryl, I think you'll get more information about this. But Jo, just for Cheryl, can you just go over again the scope of the levy in terms of what's included in terms of location shoots, photographic shoots, studio-based, etc. Does it include all the productions and what's in and what's out?
Sure. So just for the avoidance of doubt, all costs to produce an advertising asset. I would just say, instead of me going through all the different definitions here, there is a glossary at the back of the levy guide, which just covers off what an advertising asset is, what a production event is, all the sort of terms that are referenced throughout the guide. There's a glossary in the back, so it's probably worth referring to that as a kind of follow-up. But all costs to produce an advertising asset, and we kind of outline what an asset is. But that could be a stills asset, a motion asset, or an audio asset. So anything, so it's really more about thinking more broadly, is this a cost to produce this piece of advertising in whatever form it might have taken? And that would be then included. If it's a cost to use, transmit, or store that asset, so, clear cost fees, for example, or transmission costs, that's going to be excluded along with media spend and the insurance of the principal production partner. The guide is fairly detailed, and I would just refer you back to that as well as the glossary, just to kind of go through those terms and make sure you understand them. Obviously, again, it's a recommendation. If an advertiser has something they don't want to pay on principle, obviously we can't control that, and we can't mandate that they sort of follow our guide to the letter. So we can appreciate there's probably going to be slightly nuanced conversations happening across the industry about sort of small things that, for whatever reason, don't feel relevant or right to the advertiser, and that's obviously totally their judgment call. So our guide is just that, and is designed to be taken that way. But yeah, do have a look at that glossary, because it does cover hopefully everything you'll ever need to know.
And I put the link to the levy guide in the chat, the last thing that was in there, so if you want to quickly on that as we finish up. So we'll be sending a copy of it to everyone that signed up to everyone as they come. Jo, do you want to just clarify what the next steps are for everybody as they leave this call now? We're going to give them kind of 7 minutes back in their diary. They could quickly do their to-do list.
Sure, I might give them 6. I'll do 1 minute of next steps.
Okay.
So first of all, as we've kind of mentioned about 1,000 times now, the levy guide is really your next step, your next port of call. Discussing it internally with your teams, whether you're obviously a potential collector or a potential payer. Obviously, I'm sure you need to discuss it with a number of people to get that signed off if you want to participate. Next step would be to register with us, and we'll get your registration form, obviously. And then it would be kind of internal changes that you might need to make, so budget templates, discussing with other sort of partners or stakeholders that might need to know, like a production consultancy, for example. And those are my Levy calls to action. If I can be so bold as to offer some general calls to action, please do sign up for the training. There's a couple of sessions actually next week, which we've just released. There's quite a lot of slots next week available. Have a look at the resources, including the resources guide, sign up for our newsletter, and do follow us on social. That's the best ways to just find out about all of the updates. And if you need anything, obviously email me, but just be mindful we are 1.5 people, and it may take me a little bit of time to get back to you. I'm receiving quite a few inquiries right now. But I just want to thank Claire as well for participating in this. I know just the insight of a kind of real world participant is really useful, just to kind of hear how it's going on Claire's side. And thanks to Tricia for hosting as well, because you cannot do these things on your own. So it's great to have that support. So thanks everyone as well for coming. I'm doing your bit now. Trisha.
You are. You just took my script. I mean,
sorry.
Thanks very much, everybody, and thank you to Claire as well. I hope that was really useful for you. We love your feedback, and we'll be running more sessions if they're required as we start to roll out the levy, with more comms and more information coming in due course. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.